And Markus, it's your time, buddy.
And stepping in for Dick this morning. Dick is home on COVID quarantine, unfortunately, or I know he would love to be here introducing Markus. Markus Flynn is our speaker this morning. He's the executive director of Black Men Teach. Black Men Teach is dramatically changing the student experience and creating conditions where Black men thrive in education. I'm so excited to introduce Markus Flynn. I don't want to steal any of his thunder, to give him the full time to speak and share his presentation. Thanks for being with us this morning, Markus, and welcome.
I have to be quick. Steve made it very clear that if I go over time, you all will leave. So I got to make sure I'm going through this fast. So if I'm speaking too fast, let me know. I kind of want to start off with a question. And it's a question that's something that's kind of conflated or been the backdrop of my experience as I moved to Minnesota. And it's just this: who's heard of Minnesota's achievement gap? Just a show of hands. That's what I thought. So originally I'm from Chicago. I went to college in Iowa, went to Iowa State. And I moved to Minnesota because when I decided to become a teacher, I saw a list that said best public education systems in the country. And number 1 was Massachusetts, number 2 was Minnesota, and I was surprised. I saw a list at the same time that said worst achievement gaps. Number 1 was Wisconsin, number 2 was Minnesota. Again, this is the same year. And to me, that said that there's this incredibly strong infrastructure for education here, but there's inequity that's really pervasive, and it manifests explicitly in education. And I felt like if I brought my immutable qualities to the classroom, I could help overcome some of these things. And since that infrastructure is there, you can see tremendous improvement. So this was the basis of my decision to move to Minnesota to become a teacher. But often, right, I titled this presentation "The State of the Black Student" because often when you hear conversations around achievement, you lack the most important question you can ever ask in any situation, which is why. And so what I wanted to do is put together a presentation that explores the why behind achievement, because I believe achievement is a surrogate measure, and it's really a function of these environmental conditions that exist that kind of lay the foundation for achievement to come from. And so there's this quote I like. It says, "There's no achievement gap at birth," and it's a lot of truth to it. So I want to start, and again, I'm gonna move fast, I don't got a lot of time. I'm gonna start with this idea called education redlining, which talks about the effects that redlining has on education today. Right, so we think about the history of redlining. We see 1934, the Federal Housing Administration is established with this explicit goal of increasing Americans' housing stock. They roll out these maps. Areas like this, major metropolitan areas, they denote it in different colors. They say green areas are the areas that are more promising. Red areas are the ones that don't have a lot of promise, therefore we won't provide loans for these areas. However, these areas that are predominantly red are almost exclusively Black communities. And they justify this as a way to reduce risky loans. But when they do this, they take away one of the major outlets for accumulating wealth, right? It doesn't take more than a couple of Google searches to see the impact that redlining has. And so we see when we're thinking about a numbers perspective, right, we know housing and owning a home is one of the primary ways you can accumulate wealth. We see today the Black home ownership rate is 44% compared to 74% for white families. We see Black homeowners are almost 5 times as likely to own a home in a formerly red line neighborhood than a green line neighborhood. And then we see that has implications, right? Over time, you're talking about over $200,000 less in wealth you've accumulated because of where your home is. We know schooling and housing are intrinsically linked. The median value of homes near high quality elementary schools 4 times as valuable. And for most students, for 70%, where you live determines where you go to school. Now we know Minnesota's an open enrollment state, so we think maybe Minnesota's different, but only 10% of students in Minnesota go to school outside of the district that they live in. And we see that has significant implications in funding, right? Where you live, where you go to school, how that school is funded. $23 billion less across the country. Now, what does that look like on a per pupil basis? It's 2,200 less dollars, right? Significant. And we see how much money a school has or where your school is has implications on how you perform in school. So real quick, Black children are 5 times as likely as white children to attend schools that are highly segregated by race. That's what the bar graph is. Who was it who said, good idea to have bar graphs? They help. Black children are more than twice as likely to attend high poverty schools, right? So we see in both studies, or in both bar graphs, Black children are over 70% likely to be in a highly segregated school, high poverty school. Now this bar graph tells us what happens when you switch a Black student from a low poverty to a high poverty school. Well, if they're in a low poverty or an affluent school, on their math exams, this is the 8th grade math exam, score 20 points higher, which is a significant increase. Just removing a student from school types. And so that's one thing, right? When we're thinking about what are these barriers that exist that create these conditions for achievement to manifest, one of them is the legacy of housing discrimination. Next, we look at discipline disparities, and we see today. So we know bias against Black students starts really, really, really early. So this is a screen grab from a study. It was done in 2016. It's a Yale study. And it had these teachers and it gave them assignment of doing one thing. It said, just click when you see misbehavior, right? Real simple. There's a caveat. All good research studies have it, right? They're watching this video, these children playing with these little manipulatives. There's no misbehavior going on at all. What they're doing though is using the eye tracking software to see where these teachers looking when they're giving this assignment. Well, you could probably guess where I'm going from here. The teacher spent 42% of the time looking at the little Black boy, 5 years old, right? This is preschool. So we see that bias when you have this task of identifying misbehavior. You see that teachers have this tendency to base their classroom observation on the race and gender of their students. But it doesn't just stop there, right? We see actual implications from it. So I got a number, it's 3.6. So Black students in preschool are 3.6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. Again, this is preschool. There should almost be no reason. I can't think of a single reason. I'm like, 5-year-old, get up out of here. But you see 3.6. And what we see, Black students represent 18% of the population, but 48% of those who are suspended or expelled. It's a big difference. And that bias persists through K-12, right? We see Black boys are 3 times more likely just across their K-12 experience. It's worse for girls, 6 times. And here, I think the most important thing we can look at is just this: Black students represent 31% of all school-related arrests. So the school experience can be somewhat trauma-inducing from the time that you're 5 years old to the time that you're 18. You are like focused on for these negative things. And we think about Minnesota, right? We started with the question of Minnesota's education achievement gap, but what does Minnesota's discipline disparity gap look like? We got 3 numbers: 8, 10, and 42. Black students in Minnesota are 8 times more likely to be suspended or expelled. So far worse than the national average. Black students are 10% of the student population. We're talking about 42% of all discipline incidents in general. So you see these disparities here are even more pronounced. And there's studies that say differences in discipline are necessarily due to differences in behavior. So we look, in Wade County, 40% of Black students caught with cell phones were suspended last year compared to 17% of white students. So they're more than twice as likely for the same offense to receive a penalty. A new study of racial ethnic disparities in school discipline found that Black middle school students were significantly less likely than their white peers to receive verbal or written warnings before behavioral infractions. I can't see it either, but I think that's what it says. But what it says is like, they're escalated up the consequence ladder without proper forewarning more often, right? So that's what we're getting at. So the next piece, talked about discipline disparities, talked about, what's the first thing? Oh, education redlining. And now we talk about teacher expectations. And this is a quote I enjoy, but it says, we're not products of our expectations, we're products of our expectations. I just said that completely wrong. I'm trying to move this thing at the bottom.
You click on the green part.
Okay, and I can drag it. Oh, okay, we'll leave it.
We're not products of our environment or products of our expectations.
Thank you.
Less more.
Okay, so there's this thing I want to talk about called the Pygmalion effect, which is basically a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what they did is they established this in education in a somewhat unethical study done in 1968. And in the study, they took these 3 classrooms and they said, there's this group of students, like this small group of students who we have tested and said that these are your students who have this unusual potential for growth in this year. So they had 3 teachers, took a small group of students in each class and said, these are the ones who are your outliers. Of course, the caveat is, ain't nothing unique about those kids. They just randomly picked a couple students and said, these are the ones who have unusual potential for growth. They come back 8 months later, and what do you think they see? That group of students who they identified are outperforming the other students. Nothing unique about them. However, they changed the expectation in the teacher's mind. And what that tells you is teacher expectation has implications on how a student actually performs in a class in a given year. So what do we know about the expectations of Black students? Right, this is national data. Well, they took it, there was a study, they compared white or non-Black teachers to Black teachers. They said non-Black teachers are more likely to perceive Black students to be excessively disruptive, frequently inattentive, to not complete their homework. They're less likely to perceive Black students to perform at grade level, graduate from high school, complete a 4-year college degree. And so we think about, right, like the Pygmalion effect kind of established what can be done in 1 year. When we talked about that bias against Black students starts at 5 years old. So if all this happens in 1 year, imagine what happens over the course of 13. So at Black Men Teach, we often focus the conversation on just what are the benefits of Black teachers? What do we bring to the classroom? And you see there's tremendous impact on students. In the short run, held to higher expectations, of last day kind of talked about that. You see a decreased likelihood of suspension, increased likelihood of enrolling in a talented or gifted program, increased daily school attendance, and even see increased standardized test scores. And this one's been somewhat debated, but this is what you see. Black elementary, and then we think at Black Men Teach, we actually focus on elementary school. So we see, and what I believe the most compelling results are what you see when you invest in a student early and what the long-term outcomes are. So if a Black student has a Black teacher in elementary school, they're 29% more likely to graduate high school. And in that same study, this study had 600,000 students in it, and they followed them. It was in North Carolina. If they had a Black teacher between 3rd and 5th grade, and they were a Black boy who's on free and reduced lunch their entire K-12 career, they're 39% more likely to graduate high school down the road, which to me is incredible. It's like life-changing, actually. There's another study that says if you have a Black teacher in K through 3, so that early elementary, Black students 13% more likely to enroll in college down the road. If you add a second, it's not even an additive impact, it becomes multiplicative. That number goes up to 32%. What's the likelihood of having a Black teacher? Well, the past decade, basically the proportion of students of color has risen by 10%. There's roughly 86,000 Black students in Minnesota, but there's 1 Black teacher for every 150 Black students. And I have something to compare that to for white students is 1 to 10. Here's the tables from Pelsley's biennial report on supply and demand of teachers. We see there's 63,436 teachers in the state of Minnesota. We look, the distribution basically 1/4 are male, 3/4 women. And we look down here, what you see is behind that, it says 875 are Black, which is 1.4%. I think there's a big number, 60-something thousand. 95.7% are white. That's what you'll see behind there. They do not stratify by race and gender. So again, 1.4% are Black. That's what it'll say under that bar, just believe me. Which is 875 out of that 63,436. So since they don't stratify by race and gender, when we talk about Black men in the classroom, what we do, and to me, I think this is very conservative, but we take the same distribution of men and women from across the state and apply that to Black teachers. Now I know for a fact, 1 out of every 4 Black teachers is not a man. I know for a fact, just anecdotally, I believe it in my core, but if we take that same number, leaves you with 220 Black male teachers across the state. It's actually 218.7. That number out of 62,436 is less than half of 1%. It's rare, right? Completely aberrant. One thing I'm looking for is like a comparison, like you're more likely to go outside and get hit by a blue Chevy. I want something like, I haven't found it yet, but I want something like that to compare it to the likelihood of finding a Black male teacher. So the question is, why so few? Well, this is an image from iconic Supreme Court case, right, Brown v. Board, which almost happened 68 years ago to the day, sometime in May, like the 17th. And there were a lot of unintended consequences of Brown v. Board. One, you lose 38,000 Black teachers following Brown v. Board. You lose 90% of school principals in the years following Brown v. Board. And in those past 68 years, you haven't seen proportions of Black teachers in states become anything close to what you saw back then. I think there were 7 states that had a percentage of Black teachers around between 30 and 50% of their workforce. It's a lot. You don't see one state today that's anything close to that. And then contemporary barriers, I think school-induced trauma, right? We talked about those discipline disparities, specifically in a place like Minnesota. I think it's a real barrier. There's this professor that says sometimes for a Black man, returning to a school is like returning to the scene of a crime, where you were the victim. The lack of representation, right? We talk about how 95.7% of teachers in the state of Minnesota are white, less than 0.5% are Black male. So it's hard to imagine yourself doing something, even when you never see someone who looks like you. Even like my favorite teacher actually was my 4th grade teacher, name was Mary Euchre, white woman, middle-aged white woman. But even though it was my favorite teacher, I never once like looked and said, you know, I think I'll be a teacher one day because of you. You know, great teacher and everything, but I just never saw myself in her. And then there's financial implications. So I think, I'll talk about this real quick. So we know nationally Black students average $25,000 more student loan debt across majors, right? Just anything, that's just what you see. Now, if you look at the debt to starting salary for education majors, white students, about $26,000. Black students, we're talking about $52,000. The starting salary nationally for the teacher is $44,000. So there's a difference, that debt to salary ratio. Black students come out, we're talking about walking into 120% debt to salary ratio versus walking into a 61%. Not saying 61% is good either, but it's a difference. And we have data from probably about 30 Black male teachers in the state of Minnesota, and our average debt number is actually higher than that. It's about $55,000. So this is where Black men teach comes in. Let me check this time, but start walking out. So our mission is to recruit, prepare, place, and retain Black male teachers, specifically in elementary school, right? We see that longitudinal improvement. Vision, whole bunch of words, but one day we want students to have an opportunity to be culturally affirmed, be reflected and represented every time they walk into the school building. And so we have this pipeline to do this. We start at the high school level, where we do work to help teach our men that teaching is a viable career. You can actually have a living there, dispel some myths and misconceptions, provide opportunity to teach. We have an internship, we call it BMT Academy, where they co-facilitate a social emotional learning curriculum for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade boys. And then if they decide they want to go to college, scholarships. College level, first, it starts with a strong sense of community, provides scholarships, mentorships. Cameron was under there. Career training. Oh, perfect, thank you.
Yep.
So some additional supplemental training.
And stipends.
And stipends when they student teach, thank you. Career changers. Provide tuition assistance, living stipends, mentorship, and additional supplemental training. So men who are already have their bachelor's in the field, maybe working as an associate educator or a different profession wanting to come teach, we assist them. Placement in partner schools, we provide onboarding support with a positive school culture. We also provide loan forgiveness or retention bonuses for men. And so to date, we have 12 teachers that we're supporting. We've committed about $400,000 in student loan debt alleviation to get at that average $55,000 number. And then networks of support, provide individual mentoring, leveraging affinity groups, some professional development. So this is an overview of the scope of our work. Here's just an idea of the people we bring to the table. And I wanted to show a video really quickly. And so, can my people online still see this? Do I have to do a new screen share?
No, they can see it.
I just wanted to show this video to show what our work looks like in action.
Is there sound on the video?
Yes.
Before I was a teacher, I worked UPS, and I also was a football coach for many years. When I chose to transition over to teaching, it was mainly because I just saw a lot of my students not being very successful in the classroom. They were always successful in the football field, but it just wouldn't translate into the real world, the bigger picture. And that's something that I wanted to change.
Mr. White is great at building relationships. He loves to interact with them, get to know them, understand how they like to learn, and that causes students to want to be in his class and to want to come to school and see what he's going to do today.
Why I chose to become an elementary teacher is because that means that I can be impactful to my students early enough to want them to stay engaged and learn.
Black men teachers created because there's a need. When you have a Black teacher in a classroom, Black students benefit tremendously. We see in the long term, they're more likely to enroll in college, less likely to drop out of high school.
My students don't have to use movies and TV shows for what a Black man is supposed to do. They have me right here every day, teaching them the ropes the right way.
Student loan debt could be a huge burden that just wears on you over time. I think if we can do anything to make that easier for them, we have to do it.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Mr. White should be commended for his amazing hard work that he's put in the school year.
Mr. White's a great teacher because he always motivates us to help us to take big steps instead of making bigger leaps.
Mr. White is very funny, not very funny. Was his students and he's very good with us.
I can't think of someone who represents the organization better. But besides just telling you, I want to go ahead and show you one more thing to show you just how much you appreciate it. That's why.
Yep.
On behalf of Box House for Education and Black Men Teach, we would like to present you with this $50,000 check. This money here is to help you alleviate the student loan debt that you accumulated to get to a point where you can have impact on these young kids' lives.
I do promise you guys, I'm gonna be the very best teacher that I could possibly be for you guys. This was awesome. It's definitely gonna help me and my family, but it's also gonna help my students because it's just one thing that I don't have to worry about moving forward.
He's so selfless. He's clearly here to impact students and impact their lives.
I love being a teacher because I get to see growth every day. When you get to see that growth and you get to see the results of the growth, it's really an amazing feeling.
So really that's my presentation. I wanted you to have an opportunity to see what our work looked like in person or in action. Mr. White, like we said in the video, he's one of the greatest teachers you can ever imagine. He was one of those people who had accumulated a significant amount of debt coming into education late in his career because he really wanted to make change in students' lives. And we made that commitment to him where he stayed in the classroom for 5 years. Each year we'd alleviate $10,000 towards his principal. So thank you. Questions? We have time for any
We got time
questions.
for 2 questions.
Morning, thank you so much. I've heard anecdotally that having Black teachers increases their ability to handle diversity. Do you have any?
Yeah, you know, there was a study that came out recently, sometime last year around the impact that teachers of color had on white students. And I actually can't remember off the top of my head. But I do remember it was a lot of things around like engagement, and there were things around like some inspiring and there's also another study that came out recently that talked about how when you have a Black teacher, like often Black male teachers will spend more time doing like outside things with their students. And when I say outside thing, I mean outside of like academic time. And so there's that relationship piece too that's critical. And I think it does a lot to maybe undermine some unconscious bias that exists in all of us when you have somebody in this role where you get to look up to them. I mean, an elementary school teacher, right? There's things that we just naturally associate with that person. It's like being comforting, like responsible, a leader. And sometimes like society doesn't always tell you those are things you expect to have in just as random Black men. And so I think you start to undermine that unconscious bias that builds. Sir.
How are you raising money?
So it's actually a great question. I'm gonna answer it this way as an executive director. I probably would say something different. It was just me asking me. But we're having a fundraising gala. So on Friday, June 4th, we're having our inaugural gala. It's called the Gold Star Gala. As a nod to like elementary school and the work that we do. And for part of that, we're looking for like corporate funders, maybe individuals to buy tables. And also we're trying to do an experience auction. And so we're looking to have a live auction for experiences. And so things like, I think we'll have like the small private plane, we'll have like a lunch with Alan Page, an opportunity to rent out or to have pimento on a night that's all for you and a small group of friends. There's things in there like that. Like we're trying to gather unique experiences to auction off for people as part of this auction. And that piece, I need a lot of help because it's kind of hard to do. And my network is not that big. So I would love if people had I would love for everyone here to come to the gala. Invite friends, because we're really trying to build, more than raise money, I really want to build the amount of people who know Black Men Teach and get to hit the story in a compelling way. So that's one big thing. Outside of that though, we got funding from the state. Some corporate funders, foundations have been really big for us. Individuals have been big as well. But I think this gala would be a good opportunity to just expand our network of constituents and people who just know the organization, have affinity for us.
The question I had was about actually attracting talent. How do you find, especially Black men, whether here in Minnesota or outside of Minnesota, like you came, to come here to then participate in the enter these types of programs to help our state and our community raise that woeful 0.5%?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't rely on people like myself. I much rather focus on people who are from Minnesota. And honestly, a big part of that is you got to be from here to understand how to handle this winter. So I look for people here, and honestly, I thought it would be much harder to find men who'd be interested in teaching elementary school, right? Because there's so many barriers in the way, but we've been successful. So right now we have a high school fellowship program. This is our first year, it's our pilot year. We got 15 guys in it. And we have a college fellowship program. So men who are enrolled in college with the goal of becoming an elementary school teacher, 16 men at some point. And a lot of them are in 2 years, but we have some up to grad school. And 4 of them are graduating now. One of them just called me yesterday and said he got hired in one of our partner schools. And so it's precipitous, but it's coming. And I think too, the conversation has to be really compelling, and it has to start with why, like I started at the beginning. It's not teachers get this much time in the summer and it's not that. It's like, this is a way that you can fundamentally change the students' lives and you have impact in the community. And I can tell you with anecdote and data around the impact that Black teachers have. So I have this conversation like that, and it just feels different to people.
One more, and then.
Yes, do extracurricular activities play a role in this at all?
Yes. So one extracurricular activity is our Gold Star Gala that's going to take place on Friday, June 12th. But again, I would love for all you want to come to. I'll email Steve so he has all the information. But we do like a big thing. So do you know Project Success?
Yes.
So Adrienne Dirks is one of my favorite people to just talk to. And one of the things she taught me is there's this invaluable or unquantifiable benefit of experiences. So we try to do like excursions for our men, because one of the things, like every part of our program is called a fellowship, high school, college, or classroom. And it's a fellowship because it's about community. And so last week was Teacher Appreciation Week. On Friday, we went to the Twins game. We met some of the players, we met the GM. We had 40 tickets and we had guys there present for the game. I actually threw the first pitch. But it was an opportunity for us to just build community for men who, a lot of those men had never met each other. They're all Black male teachers in the Twin Cities Metro, but most of them didn't even know each other. And so always trying to find opportunities to build community.
Hey, Marcus, hey, thank you very much. A contribution to our foundation that will go back into our community and help support our organizations. And if you can send us information on your gala, we'll get it out to all the members and see what we can do to help you. And we wish you the best of luck on your journey. I think this is a very compelling presentation and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
So, and I love, we want to see a cyclone be successful. Well, thank you very much. Welcome new members. We're glad to have you here and all those that are on Zoom as well. So go out and help change the world.